Their houses were strafed. The men came in. They took them away. They interrogated them. One of them was raped. They brought them to the prison and basically accused them of being members of the NPA. Neither of them were members of the NPA and hadn't been. They were both, one of them was a workers' advocate, one of them was a peasant, just sort of living her life. When we visited them in the prison, it's a prison where men and women actually live together. And it's very dangerous, therefore, for the women. And you had a situation where I think you would just take from here and maybe to the end of this table. There were 10 women living in a room, maybe even smaller than that. Their bunks were up to the ceiling, which they had to build themselves, and their bathroom was on the side. And they were living there all together, and periodically they were asked to give massages to the prison guards. And they were forced to do these massages, but of course the massages were just not massages by themselves. And as a result, the incidence of women prisoners getting pregnant in the prisons is really high. And it's a reason, actually, that women prisoners aren't getting out, because the Philippine government and local governments don't want to admit that this is going on in their prisons. And so the situation for women in particular is very dangerous, and also the women political prisoners, the social prisoners, everybody are mixed in together. And so it's a situation where people are constantly trying to organize and build solidarity both within the prison and outside the prison. But it's very difficult, and of course, like in many other countries, the women are very isolated, and also they're very poor. And the food, people's food, medical care, clothing, everything has to come from outside. So I think, and for the women also, like their sanitary napkins, all sorts of things of their of health are very, very difficult. And one of the things that Gabrielle is trying to do is actually build consciousness among women throughout the country about the situation of women political prisoners. We also visited, the other situation that's happening is that young children are being arrested. And we visited 6 young women from the age of 12 to 16 who were accused of being child soldiers for the NPA. It was interesting because 5 of them weren't, but then one of them actually was. And she had been living with the NPA since she was 10 years old, and she talked about being a medic. And she was caught at 16, and she was brought, and she was sexually harassed like everybody else, and isolated and beaten systematically with 2 boys until she finally would admit that she was an NPA soldier. But she never did, and finally they just brought her into this, it's basically girls' center where they had all these young women. But the other young women who were there were not child soldiers and had just been picked up sort of along the way and thrown into this situation. And one of the things that the Philippine government is trying to do is use the example of children and saying that the NPA and other revolutionary movements in the Philippines are using children as child soldiers. And so that's another tactic that they're using, and they're particularly talking about the sexuality of the girls and how that's being used. So that's the other thing I just want to mention briefly, is that there is a state of war happening right now in the Philippines, in the island of Mindanao, which is the southernmost island. And they say that it's a war between Muslims and non-Muslims. But it's very interesting. Mindanao is one of the richest places in the South Pacific. It has natural gas and oil fields underneath the island and around the island. And of course the place, it just so happens that the Muslim areas are one of the places which are richest in these minerals. And the Moro people have been waging a struggle for autonomy for 100 years. And so at the moment, the U.S., although they don't admit it, there are thousands of U.S. troops in the Philippines, and although they're not legally allowed to do so, they're beginning to participate in incursions between Filipinos and American soldiers. The U.S. presence in the Philippines means that the treatment of women, of course, deteriorates. The incidence of prostitution, of rape, of sexual harassment, all goes up. And it's one of the things that Gabriela is most bitter about in terms of the relationship of U.S. bases and U.S. soldiers in the Philippines. I think all of us really have to be cognizant of what's going on, and I agree that if we build solidarity and if we can build international campaigns, that'll be a way for all of us to talk about all these women, to talk about all their common situations, and it will also be a way for us to educate ourselves. And if we're not part of, I think, our problem, not just in the political prisoner movement or the prison movement, is the single issue mentality. And that we really have to get away from that, because it's only when we build these worldwide movements that we're actually successful. And if you go on the internet or you listen to all this testimony, you'll hear, like, in every situation, people's experiences are really similar in how women are treated, how they feel about being separated from their children, the responsibilities they have if they have men in prison, the responsibilities they have if they're in prison and their families are outside. And so if we can do this together, I think we can build something that's really powerful. Thank you.